Let's hear from someone who has much more extensive and intimate knowledge about Phil and A&R recording and what it was like on those Billy Joel dates.
Yeah, we're talking with Bradshaw Leigh, who worked with Phil Ramone and Billy Joel as an engineer beginning with 1980's Glass Houses through 1987's live album from Russia, and again for Shades of Grey on 1993's River of Dreams.
Along with Billy, he's worked with other artists, including Jimmy Iodine, Tracy Chapman, and Paul Simon. You can find him online at leighaudio.com, leighaudio.com, or Brad Leigh Audio Engineering on Facebook. And you also have a new YouTube channel, Biased Audio.
Brad, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
When did you start working with Phil, and how did you come to work with him in the first place?
Started working with Phil in, I think it was 77, possibly 78. I love this story because it shows you how a little thing in life can change the course of your life. I was an usher at Carnegie Hall, and I was also working in a small studio downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, as an usher, I was at that concert at Carnegie Hall where Phil went and saw Billy and decided to use Billy's band. An usher friend of mine, George Munger, was a hi-fi nut. He wanted to buy studio monitors. So I found out A&R was selling some used studio monitors, and I went and met one of the other owners, Don Fry, and I bought these speakers for my usher friend at Carnegie Hall, and in the meantime, asked him for a job because I wanted to be a recording engineer. At that time, the process of becoming a recording engineer was you started running errands, carrying trash. That studio was so big that you worked permanently in the tape library. Then you would make tape copies, and then you'd get to sit in as a second on a session. I had worked at another studio, and at that time, the manufacturers of audio equipment had training courses in their factories to repair their equipment. This other studio had this equipment, and so I'd gone to Florida and gotten the training. So the owner said to me, I'll make you a deal. You'll have to start at the bottom again, but I need a tech. So if you come in tech for a year, I'll let you transition over and train to be a recording engineer. I did that, and they kept their word.
What was that hierarchy like? Somebody could be in the tape room?
We were using analog tape then, so every session had many reels of tape that had to be delivered to the session, and when the session was over, stored safely. So we had a library in the basement of A&R. So you would work full-time as a tape librarian, which is you just sit down there and somebody would call and go, hey, we got a session here. We need these tapes. We've got a session there. We need these tapes. And then you would work up to making tape copies, because in those days, if you did a jingle session, commercial, it would have to be transferred to film. They would want a reel-to-reel reference to take back to their office. So there was a massive amount of duplication that was done after a session. So that was the next job. And then you would become an assistant engineer, where you would learn from a staff engineer.
So what were your roles as a tech? Because you said, you would start as a tech and then graduate to engineer.
Well, this is how I also got involved with Phil. When you have a recording session in those days, every instrument was recorded with a musician playing it. There was no digital audio. There was no MIDI. There were almost no synthesizers. You would have a session where if there's strings on a jingle, you've got 20 musicians out there all making $100 an hour. Downtime was really expensive. Any technical problems would cost a lot of money. So all major studios in those days had at least one and sometimes multiple technicians on staff all day, all night during the sessions. So there would always be a Maytag repairman down the hall if there was any little glitch. And that's how I met Phil, and that's how Phil first started to like me. Was I had started working at A&R just after The Stranger. Billy came back and recorded 52nd Street. And Phil was the owner of A&R, the main owner, and pretty temperamental and perfectionist. And I'm this, 19-year-old kid, scared, sitting down the hall, just praying nothing goes wrong on this Phil Ramone, Billy Joel day. And of course, something did go wrong. And, I went in and handled it, and they questioned me and they grilled me. I got out of it alive. And then Phil said to the manager, this is the kid I want on my sessions when I'm in this building. A&R had two buildings, and his main studio was in the other building. So he came over to work in the big old Columbia recording studio. So he said, when I'm over here, this is the guy I want covering my session. So that's how I first got some contact with Phil.
You mentioned that Phil could be very temperamental and certainly a perfectionist. Did that also translate to his work in the sessions as well?
Where it translated to working with the artist was everybody but the artist. Normally you would come in and set up for a session and you position all the mics and the musicians would roll in and you'd start to get your levels and your sounds and stuff. But with Phil, you had to triple check and quadruple check. You didn't just listen to the headphones to make sure they were working with a click track. You listened with music to make sure they sounded right. You grabbed the intern down the hall to bang on the drums so you had a level. His technical perfection and his sort of venom was directed towards his side of the glass. So when the artist walked in, what Phil wanted, I think, was for the recording studio to disappear. The artist comes in and they go, all right, I'm writing this song. Oh, now I want to do this other setup. Oh, no, now we want to do this. One of the main things that gave me great pride, like working with Phil, and I worked with Phil for about 8 years, was, let's say you're tracking a Billy Joel record. Well, you come in at 3 o'clock and you're working until 11 o'clock at night with one dinner break. So there's a lot of bullshitting around. There's a lot of playing nonsense, playing a McCartney tune or whatever. There were two things that happened. One was Phil always kept a reel-to-reel machine recording in the back. Mm-hmm. And that way, if anybody just, if Billy hummed, oh, I could do this in the chorus or whatever, it wasn't lost. He wouldn't come back and go, what did I do? You could go back and take that 2-track and find it. Mm-hmm. But the other thing was you had to be really in tune to the session. So when I'm sitting there as a 20-year-old kid, as the assistant engineer, my job was running the tape machine. Well, a reel of tape only lasts 15 minutes. So you can't constantly be in record on the multi-track machine. So you got to sit there and not record. Now they may go, let's do another take. You go into record. Great. You got to keep in your mind how long the song is and will the reel run out during that take. So you're not rolling a lot. But the great thing was you're listening to the musicians play around and you start to hear something cool and you hit record. And then the first thing Phil do is he would whip his head over and look, did you get in record? Like you had to intuitively know something was happening.
When that moment was coming, yeah.
Right. And you had to grab it. There was no take two with Phil. There was no redo it. And that's why he trained such great engineers, because if you effed up, what he would do is he'd put his coat on and go, figure it out. You would have to go back and fix whatever you recorded wrong and make it acceptable to the artist, because he was not going to mess with the artist's head. And the other side of that, which demonstrates that, is Phil was very rough on me. Phil was very tough on techs. He was very tough on recording engineers. But like when you recorded on analog tape, it was destructive. When you hit record, you were removing something else. So let's say somebody's got a great performance, right? And like most of his vocals in the early records were primarily live. So let's say, all right, we want to go back and just fix the last 2 lines of that chorus. So you as the 19-year-old kid have to play the tape right before that word, go into record. And as soon as those 2 sentences are done, go out of record. But nobody's perfect.
Right.
So sometimes you would screw up. You would clip the beginning of the word of the next verse. And Phil would look around, look at you, and just mumble under his breath so the artist couldn't see it. He would go, did you lose that? Did you wipe it? And you'd go, yeah. And he'd hit the talk back and go, you did that chorus so good. I want you to do the first line of the next verse because it will make a better transition. And so that way it wouldn't upset the artist. They wouldn't see Phil get upset. So, It was all keeping that flow going.
What I've always read about Billy is he did not like doing multiples. He liked to capture it while it was fun and fresh. And so, if you're beating a song into the ground, he's going to lose interest, and that probably would reflect in the take.
Oh, yeah. Never beat a song in the ground. And the great thing with Phil was it was very apparent on the Billy dates is they'd be working on a song and you do a few takes. And there would be an earlier take that was maybe just a little off kilter, but Phil really liked it. And then they'd keep going and they'd smooth that out. And the band would walk and go, oh, yeah, that's the take. And they'd listen back to the playback and they would go, yeah, that's the take. That's the take. And then 1 or 2 things would happen. They might go, we can do better. And Phil would go, nah, I don't think so. But if you want to, go ahead. I think that other take is the take. And they'd go back in and they'd redo it. And then they'd play those 2 takes, and then Phil would go, all right, now go back and play take 3. And that would, then the band would just go, yeah, that's the take.
Well, we've been talking about, Phil's sort of overall approach in the studio, but he was also an accomplished musician. Did his knowledge as a musician and his knowledge of music theory, things like that, did that seem to play in a lot to how he acted as a producer, or was that sort of secondary to just his approach?
I think that was fascinating about Phil was, I'm not sure when I first met him that I knew that he was a prodigy violinist. I learned that after I got to know him for a while. to his credit, no, it wasn't apparent. It may have been in his mind, but he never, like sort of another type of producer that, was somebody that I just loved is Quincy Jones. Now, Quincy is so deep in the music, so deep into every note that every musician's playing, that all his conversation comes out of the chart. No, that's a B flat, not a F sharp. And it would all be very specific, but he had the musicians that were going to capture the vibe. Phil always talked in a much more, poetic way, which sort of, I think, was great because I know incredible musicians that couldn't read. It was more talking about the vibe and the style and the feel. And he may sometimes, specifically say like a beat, but he would more pull up a musical reference than he would sing you a beat. He loved talking about Kurt Weill or Schmielson or, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So he would pull up or samba or, he'd pull up a reference more than talk strict musical terminology.
So you came up, as a tech into an engineer, and we know Phil did the same thing in that sense that he came up, as an apprentice. To the best of your knowledge, how did Phil come up with his approach, with his philosophy? I'm kind of curious about that because I get the feeling that, engineers and producers didn't go to school for it the way they do now. And it seems like they just kind of wrote their own playbooks back then.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. And A&R had a specific thing, which was fantastic, which was one engineer trained one engineer. So Phil Ramone trained Elliot Shiner, who did Steely Dan's Asia. Elliot Shiner trained Ed Rack. Phil Ramone trained Jim Boyer. Jim Boyer trained me. And then because Phil was still doing some engineering when I started with him, some mixing, Phil finished up my training. So it was always a one-on-one. So you were getting that guy's style. The other thing you were getting was that guy's clients, because there was so much time being booked that if there was a jingle engineer that was doing a lot of work and he wasn't available, they would grab his trainee. And I got work because I had worked with Phil. I have to tell you, one of the big heartbreaks in my life was Phil could be difficult. And I was a young snot-nosed kid. And I took 8 years of it. And we eventually bumped heads. And we separated for a number of years and didn't really have any contact. And then I was at Right Track Recording in New York, and Phil was working there a lot. And we rekindled our friendship. And Phil gave me a rough cut of the Sinatra session that I was involved with, one of the last sessions at A&R. And it was a more musical sort of rough cut. It wasn't like this VHS that you can buy that's just like a VHS, like an MTV video. Mm-hmm. But we got to talking, and I asked him if I could interview him for a documentary. I wanted to record him because I wanted to find out, how did he go from South African prodigy violinist to recording engineer? Because I knew he at one point lived with Quincy Jones. How did that happen? So it's a little vague to me. I don't know how he got to own his own studio. I know he often referred to Bob Fine and Win Schwartau. It was Bob Fine, I think, that had trained him as an engineer. But that exact jump, I never really got the answer to.
Phil, and I'm guessing by extension A&R, was at the forefront of digital recording in the, I guess, late 70s, early 80s, right?
Phil loved and hated to be on the cutting edge of technology. He would get you on it and then get mad at you for doing it when it caused problems. One of the earliest multi-track digital sessions I saw was that last Sinatra recording, L.A. is My Lady. That album was done in A&R's A1, and we had a Sony 3324, which was a new digital machine at the time. And there were 3 techs standing by in case it caused any problems, including Roger Nichols. I don't know if you know him, but he was one of the other engineers on all that Steely Dan stuff, but he was also, like me, he was also a tech. The first changeover was stereo. There was a machine called the 1630 that recorded stereo digital audio on videotape. So the early compact discs, the ones that were released with the first release of the album, were frequently digital stereo. The Sinatra was the first digital multi-track. Phil had friends that was GRP Records that was working in his studio that had this weird 8-track, Soundstream, I think it was. Yes, so we did a lot of early stuff, technical stuff that was new. But Phil would also, like I said, he never wanted to disrupt the artist. So he, you get this new piece of gear, and then something would go wrong, and then he would go out and make a few phone calls and come back and go, enough with the AES meeting. We've got to get working. And then you'd have to toss that new piece of equipment away. because it was causing issues.
One thing I always found fascinating about Billy and his band, as opposed to some of the different artists that, you and Phil had worked with, is that up until working with Phil, they weren't experienced players in the studio, meaning they weren't session guys. And the fact that Phil and the team was able to make them work as a studio band when they were really these road dogs was really fascinating how that worked.
First of all, the amount of recording sessions that occurred in the 70s and 80s, nobody will ever believe me. Every note that you heard, if it was music in an elevator, if it was a jingle on a commercial, if it was a film score, it was played by a human being. There was a tremendous amount of business doing jingles because someone like Coca-Cola would say, we want to do a new campaign. And they would send it out to a bunch of ad agencies. So all these ad agencies had to record demos for their version of what they wanted the Coke jingle to be. And then it would become the final. And then that one ad agency would redo it. So getting good musicians was hard. The way you gauged musicians was by how much they got paid. Like certain guys, everybody was scale. And I think it's about the same. It was like $300 for 3 hours. You were really good. You were double scale. And then some guys were triple scale, like the Gads and stuff like that. They're going to be, so they're hard to get. I remember Quincy did a date in New York where he grabbed, Ashford and Simpson and every singer in the world. And they couldn't do a jingle on that day because they were all booked on a Quincy date. So getting raw young musicians, you were always looking for the new guy. I remember working with Marcus Miller when he was like 18. He became the new guy. He became a session musician. Phil liked that. He always liked to work with new talent, and he always was looking for new musicians and would give a lot of people a shot. So, in the case of Billy, Billy's band brought something to the music that I couldn't hear another way, and Phil heard that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Maybe I'll get slammed for this. Maybe the Edge knows how to play 3 notes, but he does it in a way that makes a great song. When you hired a studio musician, first of all, don't forget, when you hired a studio musician, you were hiring them for their musical personality. You could make them change, and they could be technically very proficient. Big difference is, studio musicians had to sight read and play it like on the first or second take. There was no real rehearsing or whatever. So that's one of the prime differences. But Phil was always looking for someone to add some unique personality, whether it was an unknown musician or a studio musician. He was always throwing people in the mix.
When digital recording was first coming out, what did people like Phil see as the advantage to it? Was it just getting rid of tape hiss, or was there more to it than that they saw in it?
Well, there was a few big advantages. We love getting rid of the tape hiss. Let's say you were mixing a song in the analog days, and it could be 24 or 48 track. The assistant engineer would spend 2-3 hours going through every track and automating, turning off the console between every time that musician played. Otherwise, the cumulative tape hiss would have been ridiculous when you got the high track counts. In general, we weren't that bothered by the sound. I think we were so impressed with the clarity and the lack of noise that was a big difference. Another really huge difference, generational loss. And what would happen is, listen, those sessions were expensive. You spend a day of studio time, hire an engineer, hire a producer, hire musicians, and you're into multiple thousands per day. And not only that, with Phil, a take, a performance was precious. It wasn't like, well, we can redo that. There was no we can redo that with Phil. Like, that's the frickin' take.
Right.
So when the session's over, I have to stay up all night making copies of these multi-tracks and sending them somewhere else. So, because a tape machine can eat a tape, it's a machine. It can chew up a tape. So you always had to make copies. And so another advantage with that noise in digital is when you make a copy, it's a one-to-one. So there's no signal degradation. If you were to lose the master, so what? You got a digital copy, it's the same as the master. We can mix that just as well. You damage a master on an analog recording, and when you get to the second generation, you would then be having a noisier tape with higher distortion that you were mixing the song on. Now, one other really big thing, huge thing. In general, we were working 24 track. Now, when it got into the 80s and around digital stuff, you could lock 2 machines and do 48 track. But when you were working even 48, when you were working 24 track, that's not much. You put 6 tracks down for the strings. So what we would do, give an example. You're doing backgrounds on, let's say, Innocent Man with all those doo-wop harmonies. You would lay down the first part. You'd lay down the second part. You'd lay down the third part. When you went to the fourth part, you would be live mixing the first three parts and the fourth part to a new track. Now all four parts are on one track. Now you go back and you erase those first three tracks and you double it. By combining those three tracks with the live mics, you're combining three tracks of noise with a live mic. If you have a quiet song and you have a great lead vocal, but you do a second vocal and you want to grab some lines, you've got two things to do. With Phil, you'd get ballsy sometimes and transfer into the master track. But in general, what you did was you took lead vocal 1, lead vocal 2, and then you recorded them together onto a new track, lead vocal 3. Now your lead vocal is down a generation and has all that noise. So you didn't get that on digital. It was greatly minimized. So that flexibility in working without being penalized, and especially when the digital machines became automated, in that, let's say you had a lead vocal that was good, but Billy wanted to fix one line. When I was working with Phil, we would get a good take. And let's say Doug wanted to redo a chorus. Well, a bass is almost impossible to punch in and punch out of a chord during the take because it usually sustains to the next note. So what we would do is I'd have to get up, grab a razor blade, slice the tape where that next note was, put a piece of paper in it, and that way we'd go in and record. Doug would do his bass fix, and we'd punch in start recording at the beginning of the chorus, and then instead of having to worry about punching out, it would just hit the paper leader. And then we would remove the leader, and it would come back. So digital machines became automated with that feature. So if Billy wanted to fix one line, we would do it on another channel. And then we would tell the machine where to go in to record, where to go out. It would do a digital transfer and there'd be no signal degradation. So that's a lot of things that people don't really think about when they compare analog and digital.
You were talking about, specifically like, with the background vocals within Innocent Man, you've got to make decisions as you're tracking because you're committing all these background vocals. You're bouncing them down to a track. And then they're gone for good. And
by the way, that's what made those old records so damn good. And I'll give you an example. First of all, there was the curse of the rough mix. Phil, every day you'd track a song, you do a rough mix. Then you do some guitar overdubs, you do a rough mix. Then you add the vocals, do a rough mix. Phil wants to move on to the next song and do the background vocals. So I've got 7 minutes to do a rough mix. So I'm like a musician. I'm not thinking. I'm just pushing. And I'm balancing. And I'm recording. And then a month later, I go back and I have all day long to mix that song, and I cannot get it to sound as good as that damn rough mix that I did in 7 minutes because I was just playing the instrument. My mind wasn't thinking.
Right. You didn't have a time to overthink it.
Yeah. And with Phil, another thing he did, and this was shown a lot with Billy. And like I said about him wanting the studio to be sort of disappear to the artist so anything could be there on a minute's notice. We did something which in the 70s was relatively unusual, which was we hooked up a lot of outboard effects that were ready to go. Yeah. We had a phaser pedal wired to the console. We had a roll-in tape echo wired to the console. We had a handful of things, and Billy would just go, you'd start working on a song, and he'd go, give me some foosh. That's what he called a flanger, a phaser. Put some foosh, give me some foosh. Now, the foosh could be on the piano. The foosh could be on the vocal, but it wouldn't be Billy playing with something out there. We'd do it in the control room, but we always recorded it on a separate track because that sound was key to that performance. Do you know what I mean? Like if you sing with a certain tape delay like John Lennon, then your performance is going to be molded to that delay that you're hearing. So we would always record those effects separately. Didn't matter how crappy they were. That was it. That was the sound.
And I remember reading how you all had set up for Billy in the live room for a few different set effects that he could dial in for his headphones, similar kind of situations to where if he wanted a little more reverb, a little more something, he could just kind of dial in his sweet spot on the fly.
Yeah, well, that wasn't maybe later, but there was no real mixer at the musician position. So we sort of did it from the control room, but we had these sort of presets that, like I said, he could use his vernacular because he's not a technical guy. Do you know what I mean? He's a musician. And that's what's so unfortunate about how the world has changed. I don't want to be, the old days were so good. But there was a time. See, what made me thrilled as a recording engineer was, I can tell you a couple of the highest points in my career. Please. But it was Tony Levin spent his life to play the bass. 100% of him was consumed to play the bass. Steve Gadd started with military drumming. His life was drums, and my life was engineering. So when those guys came in the studio, they could be pretty much oblivious to the technical side. Now, there is an advantage that guys today can tailor stuff to their own likes, but their focus was purely on the music, and you guys deal with the technical. And, I can tell you two of the strange high points in my life was, one, I was working with a band, and Bono and Edge stopped by, Nigerian reggae band, and that they loved. And Edge leans over while there's a playback and goes, "Yo, man, what you using on the kick?" That, and working with Tracy Chapman, which was, the percussion Minu Solino and Steve Thornton, who had done all the Sting records, Tony Levin on bass, Roy Bittan on piano, and Manu Katché on drums. They come in for a playback, and Steve Thornton says, "Man, the djembe sounds great." See, that's it for me.
That's it.
You know what I mean? He's dedicated his life to freaking percussion. And so I'm one of them. Do you know what I mean? In my own way, I've raised myself up to one of them.
We were reading through the Phil book, and it seemed like he was involved with a lot of landmark recordings for various artists. Was that something that was just part and parcel for different people, or was that something Phil gravitated towards or had a penchant for?
His discography, if you go into Discogs, you'll just be like, no. Coltrane? No. Just Girlfriend Ipanema? No. Just those two references I'm giving you, there are hundreds of them that I can't think of. I was just editing a video, and I went back and went through Discogs, and even I was happy. Marilyn Monroe singing Happy Birthday, Mr. President, recorded by Phil Ramone.
Was it really?
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. The early Streisand in the part. The early Streisand recordings recorded by Phil. I think what happened with Phil in some regards was he was a musician that got two big things. He was a therapist for the artist, and he understood what the technical capabilities were. And he would stretch the technical capabilities so the artist, because, people like Streisand are difficult. Billy wasn't difficult. But Billy was a great singer-songwriter. He didn't have the temperament for the process of making the record. Right. And by the way, that's what sort of bit us in the ass in River of Dreams, was I felt kind of bad because, I went out to the boathouse in Shelter Island when they were saying, well, Billy wants to do this. He wants to do a raw, rugged album, a dirty record. He doesn't want it polished. Can you make this work? And when I went out there, we basically recorded virtually the entire album. And they decided that they had wanted some singles. And so they added, so Danny Korchmar was coming in to do a few singles. But on that point, I still felt like a kid. Billy had just gotten a boat built. And it was the first boat that he had built that was all custom to his thing. And he would, he'd come up to me and go, "Hey, Brad, you want to play hooky?" And we'd get on the boat and go out and run. So he needed somebody to drop the responsibility in their lap of all the aspects of the recording that he didn't have the patience for. And I didn't pick up the slack. It was me and Tommy Burns, and I still didn't feel like, because I started out as a 19-year-old kid with it, so I still didn't somehow, try to grab the reins, though I don't know if I would have been able to. But if you were to go back and listen to those tracks that were cut, they're almost identical. With Lib and Skylar and Tommy Burns, they are very close to what that record became when Korchmar recut it with all studio musicians. And the irony of it was, so then they released the record. And then I go see Billy live at the Garden. And it's back to that band. So it sounds like the versions that we had cut in the Boathouse.
It's funny because I've heard a handful of those, and it's like you really hear them in many instances trying to recreate what you guys had already done out there.
And for me, a lot of guys did that at the time. Like Springsteen had used Almost Ain't Band in that time period, I think. Zach Alford and stuff. There's a certain grit to Lib that I love. There's a certain mania. There's a certain and like Doug's playing too. Right. I love that stuff.
It's something that it's hard to articulate, but when it's not there.
We found that out. We just did an episode going through all these cover songs of Billy Joel songs, and we said that that's when you really realized how great the Lord's band was, because once
I love seeing them live.
Records, I've seen them. I've seen them once. I was hoping to see them this year, but obviously that didn't happen. They were amazing when I saw them up close and personal. Nothing like it.
Yeah, they were great.
Billy still sounds great. Obviously, the musicians he's got with him wouldn't be with him if they couldn't play their asses off. They're great players and everything like that. But then you go see Richie and Liberty and Russell and them, and it's like you're taken right back to those early live performances. And
it's fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Just thinking about what it was like bringing those guys in the studio. Now, by the time you were working on Glass Houses, the core band would have been working on their fourth record together. What were they like what was it like with them in the studio? You talked about it feeling very live, and they were really just capturing those performances.
First of all, it was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the Phil sessions. When we did those dates, it was the big old Columbia recording studios on 52nd Street that had become A&R. And we would put clip lights up on high mic stands, colored lights. So the room was black and there was just colored lights over the different musicians. So it was sort of like a stage, but sort of industrial. Nobody ever walked into a Phil Ramone session that was not working on the session. And that whole thing about, the technical, about get all the problems out fixed in advance and make sure it's smooth. It became like a clubhouse. And it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Those Billy records, I just remember were being fun. And, to my knowledge, my memory, Doug was pretty quiet. Lib's personality. I mean, come on. Lib's personality is so it was the Phil, Billy, and Lib show as far as like the jokes going back and forth.
Oh yeah.
And those guys were tight buddies. It was supposed to be fun. And there was a hierarchy. Phil was king.
Yep.
Phil was absolute king. Billy would, kind of trust him, and Lib would bust some chops. What can I say?
He is forever the comic relief. He's I've known him for 20 years now, and first thing that struck me when I met him was his sense of humor. He's just hilarious.
I mean, I don't think Russell on those sessions was as vocal as he is now, because he was one of the last guys brought in. But Russell is one of the funniest people I've ever met. Russell is a riot and a great musician too, man. He should have been famous. He wrote some stuff I loved. And he wrote stuff that Phil used. He wrote stuff that Phil used with other artists.
Oh, that's right. There was I know a couple like Karen Carpenter.
Yeah. It's
incredible. And just that organic chemistry, that those ingredients all together in one room, it comes through so well in the recordings. And I think that's part of what always drew me to it. Brad, we want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with us. It was really insightful to learn more about your work with Phil and with Billy and his process along the way. So thanks again for chatting with us.
My pleasure. It's been a lot of fun.
Here we are talking again with Bradshaw Leigh, who was in the studio with Phil on all these great records.
In the last episode, Brad talked mostly about working with Phil Ramone in particular. And, and he started telling us a few other things. And so we decided to have another conversation with him. And let me tell you, man, he was off to the races this time.
His stories are so great. And just to hear his insights on all of this was so fascinating. All those records that he worked on and, the trip to Russia, coming back around with River of Dreams.
Yeah. So let's hear from Brad now. Brad, when you were last on, you talked about how you were actually there at the Carnegie Hall show that Phil saw, which happened a little before The Stranger, and that was a big part of Phil and Billy getting together in the studio. And then the first Billy record you worked on was 52nd Street, right?
I mean, it's a fantastic memory. I was there for 52nd Street. Right. I was outside the room, which, by the way, first of all, 52nd Street is my favorite Billy Joel record by a mile. I love that album. Right behind the control room was a room that was the tape duplicating room. So the assistant would, during the session, run out and, make cassette copies for Billy to take home. So I'm hearing this stuff. I'm hearing that record hot off the press. And by the way, there's not that much overdubbing on that record. That record is pretty much how it was cut live. There's some tasty things added. But for me, being in the studio and, standing just outside the room and hearing that was just phenomenally exciting. I was only brought in to fix broken shit, but I was not actually part of the record.
So the first one then being Glass Houses.
Yeah, Glass Houses.
From what we can tell, this record was different in the sense that it was the first time it was just Billy's core band in the studio.
Right.
Every record has its own vibe. Was the process different in the studio for every record? Was the vibe different in the studio for every record, or was that more just the output?
I'm guessing that The Stranger, 52nd Street, and Glass Houses were relatively the same process. They were cut in the same room, same engineer, same producer, a little bit of a mix-up in the band. I know that when I set up Glass Houses, I was there for 52nd Street. I set up the same arrangement that was done for 52nd Street. I think it started to diverge, especially a little bit when Phil had a falling out with the other owners of A&R. And so at a certain point, we left A&R and started, and that was our home, and started working at other studios. Also, technology was advancing, so some of the setup would get a little bit more complicated and things expanded and different sounds. But when you throw Lib and Doug and Russell and David Brown and Billy in a room, that's 80%, 90% of your experience. One example is, my memory is, and I could be wrong about this, that on Glass Houses, the majority of the vocals are live. And this is one thing I would really like to address about Billy's process, which was like the most amazing thing about working with him for me. Billy would come in with ideas, and there would be a verse and a chorus. And, all for Lena, he would sing melodies, na 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 na, and he would sing BS lyrics. So like, All for Lena was Funny Papers. There are other titles that I can't tell you. But so he would have all these different ideas. And then he would come in another day and he would have glued all those ideas together into like maybe grab this chorus, that verse or whatever. And it became kind of a song. So we'd track that song. Then he'd go home and he would really like nail the structure. And he'd come in. All right, now we got the song with the band. He'd sing it with his bullshit lyrics, which were now, he had the melody for the entire song, maybe not all the words, and they would record the song. Great, we got the song recorded. Here's what's freaking amazing. He would go home, write the lyrics, the band would recut it. Meaning Lib wanted to play to the lyrics. We had the song recorded. It was done. And what was great about that was we would then, when he got the final lyrics, and so you could feel it. When you're in the room, you could just like feel like that was a great take. And then even one thing that would go down a little bit further. All right, so that song's finished now, right? Now they're working on another song that they don't like. And they're just hacking through it, and it's not frickin' working. And, we take our Chinese dinner break, and then they would go into that song that they had cut before, and then that would become the take. So they're like real live performances, more so than recording sessions.
Yeah, you're capturing the performances rather than piecing together an album, so to speak. It's more about capturing the moment.
And I don't know when it started to change, but I can tell you that most of my memory of Billy in the studio is live vocals. It's just nobody does that. I know on 52nd Street, I'm pretty sure on The Stranger, and I know on Glass Houses, the majority of the lead vocals are live.
That really shapes the sound of these recordings too, because try as you might, you're still going to get some bleed between the piano microphones, Billy's vocal mic, and the drum mic, because you're all in a room together. That's going to inform how these records ultimately sound and helps make them sound more live in that way.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I did try to push for on River of Dreams. Was he was in this big bombastic boathouse and he had a large PA, which he used to rehearse and write. And then we turned the PA off when we would track. And I was like, Billy, you got to record with the PA. Like him singing in the room with the PA blasting just sounded phenomenal. And he wasn't up for it. He just wasn't up for it.
One thing that always was fascinating to me was Songs in the Attic, how you were all able to make that sound so cohesive, being recorded in so many different settings, different, whether it be a sound check, small club, big arena. But you're able to still tie it all together and make it one cohesive recording.
A lot of that goes to Jim Boyer and, Elliot Shiner, but a lot of that gluing together was done in post. Like a lot of the ambience and audience is glued together. And the thing was, we had reels and reels of stuff that we collected. But Phil wanted everything to be authentic. And if you go to a video post house, they have applause, they have this. And I'm trying to think of what live recording we were working on where the post house just wanted to murder me because we were stitching together. It was either out in Long Island or one of those, maybe Russia. Oh, it was Russia. And we were gluing it all together for the ABC and the HBO special. And I insisted on using audience from that show. Like they had reels of audience that was clean, that didn't have somebody screaming whipping post on it. You know what I mean? So they're just like, well, let's put audience in here. So, we lifted audience from those shows. And I think the audience and the reverbs that were used and the vocal effects helped glue a lot. Like if you were to listen to just the dry mics, you
Yeah.
get a lot more of a contrast and hear those different venues. I love that record.
Songs in the Attic. When he set out to do a live album, do you remember if the idea the whole time was to recast these old songs, or was there just an idea to do a live album and this idea came along later?
To be totally frank with Phil, he had a very tight personal relationship with the artist and the label. So there are things that were not discussed in front of him. So I would get a call, hey man, go to the studio. By the way, when we recorded Glass Houses, it wasn't booked as Billy Joel. It was booked as another name. Billy and Phil used to do that they didn't want the record label sniffing around. So they would book studio time under an alias. So, I don't know, but there's one thing I do know and one thing I have a question about that's just my question. I have no facts to back it up. One is he wanted the stuff cut rejuvenated with a new band. The other thing is they're great songs, and they, to some degree, were overlooked. And now that he was famous, it was then representing it to them. And I'm really curious how this falls into the whole Artie Rip issue. Do you know what? I never heard anybody say anything, but I wonder if he recut those old songs and then people were buying Songs in the Attic instead of Piano Man. Was that bypassing Artie's deal? I don't know. Because he had signed a bad contract early in his career. But I don't know. I there's no facts that I have to back that up.
Well, what was fascinating too is just 2 years later, 83, Artie struck a deal with Columbia on his own and they reissued Cold Spring Harbor. Like Billy, I know, had nothing to do with it, but he couldn't really fight it.
Yeah, a matter of fact, somebody's going to have to look on that record and see if there's a sheep on the label.
I think there is all the way through the bridge.
Okay, because I don't know when that deal was cut.
I want to kind of go back to this because you said something that kind of piqued my interest. You said how the Glass Houses sessions, and I guess others too, Phil would put them under other names so that the record company wouldn't come sniffing around. Even by that point, like with Billy putting out like 2 blockbuster albums, was there still a concern that somebody from the label was going to come by and try to dictate something or give notes or just freak stuff out? Like, what was the thought process behind that?
First of all, the heavy Don DeVito, those guys were heavyweights too. So it wasn't like you could tell them they couldn't come by. They were respectful and they were friends. I mean, from what I could see, Don DeVito and Phil and Billy and all those guys were tight. But I think it was more of a psychological freedom of no pressure. Because the thing was, label was going to pay for it, but maybe not initially. So they could go in and play without anybody getting an invoice at that point. You've been in the studio for 3 weeks. What do you got? I don't think that it was necessary, but that was also, one thing about Phil that was also really hard to work with was he was not conservative with studio time. And so what we used to do, and this happened during Songs in the Attic, was he eventually went to RPM Studios on 12th Street and just said, what do you want a month? It was a one-room studio. What do you want a month? I'll just pay you a month. And then he billed all the record labels. So I think he actually made some money on the deal, but he didn't have to worry about destroying his budget because he had bought a month of studio time. So he wasn't under the clock because the clock wasn't his thing. And also, I mean, when you think about it, what is a Billy Joel record? They're so different. If you look at Innocent Man and 52nd Street and Glass Houses, and then to have the freedom to make that pivot where that's one of the most common things that you'll hear from a label as well. It's not really, there was one label that told us that Phil produced a Stephanie Mills record and told us it wasn't black enough. Do you realize how insulting that was to Stephanie Mills?
Oh, I can't imagine. Yeah. My God.
You know what I mean? So it's like, well, so just avoiding all that.
We were talking recently too about The Nylon Curtain and An Innocent Man were released only a year apart.
Right.
Time frame wise, they were so close together, but couldn't be further apart with how they turned out.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a doo-wop fan.
Yeah.
I grew up a child of the 60s and so in the 60s, there was like greasers and there were hippies and they sort of overlapped.
Yeah.
And so there was a division there. So I was more on the long hair side. I thought Billy was committing career suicide doing An Innocent Man. When you think about what was before it and then doing like a doo-wop record, I was just like, really?
There was nothing suggesting that would have done well at all.
No, and it sure did.
Speaking of The Nylon Curtain, I know Billy has said that was his favorite because of how different his approach was. And, he mentions, using the studio as an instrument and so many different sounds and effects and things never heard before on a record of his, and really not since. Do you have any memories of doing that record?
I have a lot of memories of all these records, but at that point, I was doing other projects. So Phil was juggling projects. So I was spending a little bit more time on those other projects, and Jim was the primary engineer. It was really just a head dive into that genre, into that feel. And She's Right on Time. And that's one of my favorite songs. And that's one of the deep tracks. One thing about making records in that period was the technology was constantly shifting. Mm-hmm. So you would get a new keyboard. You would get a new outboard effects device that could do things. So you would plug it in and turn it on and do stuff. I don't know when it came from. It's not on the record, but there is a synth patch that's got a helicopter. And I think that may have triggered Billy on Saigon. Because the song starts and it's got that helicopter in it. And I don't know if that triggered his thought pattern or whatever. But I do remember hearing a helicopter patch on like a Juno or a synthesizer or something like that. So I think a lot of that was using new technology to sort of bend back and do like that sort of Beatlesque stuff.
It is interesting in that way, the fact that it is utilizing a lot of the new technology then, but also being a big homage to the Beatles.
I think probably the simplest statement about that record would be if the earlier statement I made that Billy didn't have the patience for the process of making a record, that he was a songwriter and a great piano player, then the band pulled it together, that would apply least to this record. Because it had to be a collaboration between him and Phil and Jim Boyer in order to come up with that sonic landscape. It's not just that Billy's gonna write Allentown and walk out of the room and somebody's gonna put a pile driver on it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? There had to have been an interaction with Phil and Billy going, hey, I want this kind of thing on it. I want something industrial. This is most likely the record that he dove his head in the deepest to influence the sonic character of it.
What was your involvement with the Live in Russia album?
They had the Manor Mobile truck that Jim Boyer was in, and he was recording all the live concerts at the venues. I brought a fly rig, which was, in those days, I had a Trident console that weighed about 125 pounds and two 12-track machines that each weighed about 80 pounds. They attached me with the documentary crew. So I traveled with Billy as he traveled through Russia. So like when you go down to Tbilisi, Georgia, and he does that, what was not supposed to be a performance in an opera house, and he does that performance. The Russians were great with that stuff, where they're just going to have a jam session. You walk into an opera house and there's a full audience.
And it's packed, yeah.
So I recorded all the off-venue stuff, and then I mixed the HBO special and the ABC and HBO. I forgot. Yeah. So I mixed those. I mixed all the music on those two specials and did the recording and the remote stuff. And Jim mixed and produced the album and did all the live recording.
Was being in a different country, particularly, in Russia at that time, did that add more to it?
Greatest trip of my life. I mean,
really?
Think back. Nobody was going to Russia then. One. When I get there, I'm listening on Radio Moscow to the comments about Reagan bombing Libya. Chernobyl had happened, and Russia was the most fantastic place in the world. As a matter of fact, I went back on 5 more trips working. I loved it. And It was a love-hate situation because it was like wacko Disneyland. But here's the important thing about it. The people had nothing. When you got married, you lived with your parents. There's great books about this. They had bootlegging before the internet. A guy would go to a park with a cassette player that he would rewire with 8 outputs, and you would bring your cassette player and you would pay him 25 kopecks and patch in and get the latest Rolling Stone records. They cut vinyl on old X-rays because they didn't have, vinyl stamping for independent records. These people would do stuff like they were into literature. They were passionate. I met a famous woman rock star there that was in a band that would make David Byrne look relatively sane. And I didn't know, oh God, I can't think of his name now. A very like a Bob Dylan type, but I'd never met him, and he had gone to Russia after me. And I get a letter from him. It's because he smuggled out a letter from this Russian rock star that had a crush on me. But so, everything you did, you'd go to the hotel with your whole crew and you'd walk in the room and they'd say there's no rooms. And then people would go back in a back room and argue and they'd bribe somebody and then suddenly your rooms would appear. You could only eat at the cafeteria when they served meals. So a lot of people hated it. But, I went to a party in Gorky Park, which was a famous book about spying at that time. There was a studio there owned by a guy named Stas Naumann, which was the sort of allowed kids to be rock artists.
Yeah.
You couldn't be a rock star in Russia. Like, you had to work for the government. And so I'm in Gorky Park. I meet this guitar player. I go back and crash at the house and I come out and there's a zoo across the street with a bear and I'm in Moscow and I've got to figure out how to get back to Red Square. I couldn't have been happier. But, they did do a thing at one point to appease people, which was at the hotel, they got Hard Rock to fly burgers in and they got the Marines to cook them. And the Marines showed up in a Ford pickup truck at the hotel driving the wrong way down the streets because they were under diplomatic immunity. So the people that were really happy to get the Hard Rock burgers didn't really get the Russian experience, I think would probably explain it. And like Billy says in the documentary, when he first started performing, it's the same thing that happened in Tbilisi with that concert, was the tickets were all given to hire older Russians, and it really pissed him off.
Yep.
So, it's just a very rigid, corrupt political structure, but the people, because they had nothing, had just really huge hearts.
I was curious about An Innocent Man. Looking in the liner notes, that certainly has the largest cast of musicians. Did basic tracks with the band get cut and then were, horns and vocals and all that done without everyone else being there? That seems like that was a bit more of a production based on how many people were playing and singing on that record.
One thing that was real different on that record was they had to structure all those background vocals. So therefore they brought in, I believe it was Tom Baylor, who had done all the Michael Jackson stuff, had worked with Quincy and done all that stuff on the West Coast. So they had to bring in a bunch of singers. It would have been brutal for them to try to recreate those backgrounds without somebody figuring out chord charts and telling singers which notes to sing like that. So right there, you've got a handful of background singers. You've got a background arranger. Phil had his cast of arrangers that he used for horns and strings and horns and string sections that he liked to work with. This is, in a sense, the most pop production because it is recapturing those old records. So you had to stack the backgrounds. It's like the Phil Spector stuff. You had to stack the strings. You had to stack the horns. So I think that's probably why this has the, that sort of fatter, more addition to the core band.
When it came to sending these out, so to speak, for background vocals and string arrangements, would they just sort of ship off the arranging and give these kind of tapes that the core band made and say, can you put some strings on this, and it would kind of come back ready, or was there a lot of collaboration on those?
First of all, some of this is before MIDI. I mean, these days, and other stuff that I've done later, like when I did a Carly Simon score with Rob Mounsey, he was able to mock up the full orchestra in a computer, and you knew what you were getting. Mm-hmm. Back then, Phil would have a meeting. He would choose the arranger based on the style that he wanted. Then he would sit down and he would have a meeting with him and explain what he wanted, give him the tape. To my knowledge, there's a really good chance that arranger showed up with that chart that day and it was changed on the fly if it was changed. Now, Phil may have seen the chart. I sort of doubt it because in those days, you didn't have computers to print. And matter of fact, they continued doing this because people like it anyway, but you used a copyist. So the arranger would write the arrangement, send it to a copyist who would hand write out the night before the sheet music for the 20, 30 musicians for each part. The arrangers, the players, everybody was good enough where they would run through a pass and do it, and they could come in and talk about it and make changes on the fly. Mm-hmm. I think probably the background vocals with Tom Baylor, I think those were probably worked out on the fly in the studio. I remember spending a lot of hours stacking those backgrounds on that record.
And when you say stack the background vocals, just a small group of singers actually just overdubbing on themselves. It wasn't like a...
Again, this is from memory. It was Eric Troyer, Rory Dodd, and I think a third singer. They would double and triple it and sing different parts and split parts differently amongst them. Yeah, I was in on some of those sessions. It was a lot. But see, for an engineer, that's hard work. Because like I said, you're recording 3, you're mixing them, you're recording 3, you're mixing them, you're recording 3. You got to keep track of all of them. You got to get the balances right. That's the more work side. The joy side of being a recording engineer is tracking a live band and mixing the song. The stuff in between can be a little fatiguing at times.
After the bridge, there was a break. Billy went a different direction on Stormfront, working with Mick Jones, and came back around to giving you a call in the early stages of River of Dreams. How did that come about to where you kind of came back into the fold there? Was it just a phone call one day?
Yeah, I got a call from Bill Zampino, who at the time was sort of overseeing the making of this record. Billy had this dream of doing like this raw garage band record out on the island, and he rented this boathouse that was right on the water that had a dock. It was like a big barn. And they put up a wall and built a control room, and they had rented a console and some other equipment. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but Jay Healy was engineering it. Jay Healy had done the prior album, the Mick Jones record.
Storefront, yeah.
And the situation was kind of a little bit out of control. I don't know how it came to be. My understanding was Jay just didn't think the situation was workable. He wasn't happy working in that boathouse with that equipment, etc. So I got a call saying, hey, man, they asked me to come out, take a look. They said, do you think you can make it work? I did some technical changes first. I twisted the control arm around so hopefully it sounded better and rearranged some stuff. I was totally happy working at that. And like I said, I think we cut 7 or 9 tracks, most of which Korchmaier's version wound up on the record. But he originally was going to they wanted a single. So he came in to cut like 3 tracks. And then once he worked with a new band, and I was like, dude, I'm working with this band in a boathouse with this old equipment. You're choosing, first call studio guys in the Hit Factory. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. Like, give me a break.
We hear things like, oh, we just drove a truck up for Songs in the Attic and we recorded live. And, oh, Billy just built a studio out in a boathouse. What goes into an artist wants to record in a non-traditional setting?
Well, in that case, we sort of went with what it was. It was a big space and it was a big control room. I tried to do some acoustic treatment to make it work. What Billy had done that made that situation a little bit more doable was there was a guy that worked on his PA crew that was trying to start a PA company. So he had a console. He had patch bays and a bunch of old outboard equipment that was all meant to be broken down and road carried. But at that point, you had 3 options. You could either do like U2 did, in one of their early records, which is what I did on the Russian record when I was traveling, which is you rent a bunch of gear and road cases and plug it all together in a room and hope for the best. Or you rent a remote truck, which was done on like Billy Live at Long Island and Live at the Garden and Shea Stadium. And oddly enough, mixing Songs in the Attic was actually done at Phil's house in a remote truck eventually.
Okay. So you were involved with Live from Long Island as well?
I was out there. Again, I may have been just helping Jim out. Jim recorded it. The only thing I remember about that, they lay wood over the ice for the chairs and the stage. And there was a hockey game the next day, and they had a Luma crane for the camera. And it leaked hydraulic fluid that seeped down under the wood onto the ice, and it screwed the ice for the Islanders.
No kidding.
It caused a big problem.
Right.
Just a little more on the Shelter Island sessions. What was that like being in a non-traditional space with Billy? Did you feel like he fed off the vibe? Did the band feed off the vibe?
Yeah. When you ask about the non-traditional, do you mean out at the boathouse or do you mean touring in Russia with that remote setup?
We'll start with the boathouse. What was that like for the band?
That was also an interesting band too, because that's the first time I had worked with Skylar Deal on bass and Tommy Burns on guitar. And Crystal was out there quite a bit too. But the only person I was really connected with was Liberty and Billy, because I had never met the others before. I think it was sort of a figuring it out vibe. It was a little bit less of the raucous, cohesive band. And again, there wasn't a taskmaster in the room. There wasn't a producer in the room that would have sort of centered the energy. But obviously, Billy created a lot of material, and I think there's some great stuff. He's got a couple songs on that record that remind me that they could have fallen back in The Stranger sort of 52nd Street days. What I was a little bit unaware of was they would bring me out for a few days a week at a time to record, but the band would occasionally go out there and rehearse. And that's why they had the PA. So the band would work and rehearse for 3-4 days. They'd call me. I'd come out and record a track. I think I was off balance working with Billy and a new band, essentially. Yeah. It was just sort of feeling my way through it.
So on a side note, how about Billy and Liberty finally reconnecting?
Oh, it's so great. It's
that was the best news of the year.
I don't think people understand the nature of a band relationship. You're like brothers going through this intense experience. You're traveling together. So you're living together for months at a time. You know all each other's dirty secrets. And then at the same time, you're in a business. And the relationship sort of shifts where, you're business partners, then one becomes more dominant. And that's why you see so many bands break up. But what they share, these guys are all family to me. And I also think that's why Billy did so well with this band. They're all Long Island guys. You know what I mean? And Billy's he's actually almost like a shy guy. So, he was like in his element with his buddies when he was making these records. So the connection I have, like the flashbacks, thinking of making all these records and being there when they were created, it's a family, it's a business. Families have divorces, businesses have breakups, but it's very hard to maintain for a long time. These relationships are intimate. They're personal. When you're in the studio with somebody making music, it's an intimate relationship. And so when it ends, it's like a breakup. It's good to try to contain those feelings when that happens, because artists have the choice to go in a different direction. They have a choice to do something different if they decide in that moment they want to do it, but it usually doesn't go over very smoothly, and it's usually not handled very well. It's like getting a breakup with a text. I always thought it was unfortunate that those guys rubbed each other the wrong way at one point, and it just seems right. They managed to smooth things out. I saw Billy live about a year and a half ago. I ran into Steve Cohen in the Village, and he got me passes. And so I went in before the show. Well, I used to hang out at Billy's house when we were making records, but now we're not making a record. So we sat down and talked for like 45 minutes. And it's like he knew me when I was 19. I go, Billy, man, I've known you for like 30 years. He's like, Brad, it's 40. And I was embarrassed doing it. I asked him for a photograph. Because in those days, to be in that room, you didn't ask for an autograph.
No.
You didn't ask for a photo. I have one photograph of me that somebody took over my shoulder with Billy. Aside from that, no photographs exist, even though I worked on like 8 albums with him. And I finally asked him for a photograph. But it was great for us to, sit down and talk, because it reconnects that thing. Few people will know what it's like to go through that in music.
I think Brad has to write a book called Wacko Disneyland, My Time in Russia.
Seriously. Yeah. I mean, he went back, 4 or 5 times, he says?
I'd love to hear the rest of those stories. This has been a pretty cool first episode for the year.
Here we are looking forward and looking back all in one episode. Brad Leigh with some incredible insight into his career with Phil and Billy.
As usual, let us know what you think.
Yeah, you can reach out to us at glasshousespodcast@gmail.com. We read and respond to every email. You can also find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all over the place. Come connect with us. We'd love to chat with you guys.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review if you like what we're doing. It's a quick and easy way to support us. The more 5-star reviews we get, the more people that Apple will put us in front of, and so the more people get to enjoy this as well. And we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time. Thanks.